Mm-hmm.
movie industry, and
Yeah.
why is this something that is so important for you? Like, what's your why?
I think the answer probably goes. Let me take you way back.
Back to
I think
childhood.
you know what it was. I think it really started because I was an only child, and what happened to me is that my mother was working pretty late. And
Where were you born?
In Germany, um, and every day I was basically on my own. In Germany, the school finished at 1 p.m. And my mother didn't really come home until about 7:30. So I had basically this whole day to myself, and I would have to fill it up with tennis lessons or football or organizing all the games in the in the local school or after school. All of that kind of stuff became an expertise. So I became sort of the organizer, and then I was like the class speaker, and because I was really good at sports, I was able to kind of bring these groups together. And I think it also happened because my mother was a bit of an interior designer. So every year and a half, we would move to a new place. And she would say, get your stuff, we're moving to a new place. And so we were moving around an incredible amount, so much so that we ended up in the furthest place on the planet in Australia.
Okay, so you moved to different countries.
Yeah, we moved to different countries, and then what happened was that every time I landed a new school, it would basically start off again at ground zero. So I had to go and make all these new friends immediately. And if you're having to do that every 18 months, then it's an extreme shock to the system, but you either become very good at it or you sink.
That's right.
Let me put a pause on this. I'm just thinking if this is recording.
Yeah, I think it still is. It's just the screen like falling asleep.
Really? Okay. Yeah, it seems to be okay.
So
let's just make sure you're in.
Born and raised in Germany, but originally you have different roots, right?
Yeah. Okay, so ask me again.
You have South American roots also.
No, everybody thinks I have South American roots, but I don't have any South American roots. Ostensibly Russian, Chinese, with a bit of Italian probably thrown in. I was hoping that it was some Jewish as well, but it turned out that I didn't have any Jewish in it, just because
so you found out when you did your DNA test?
Yeah, I did the DNA test, but also, my mother had done a very extensive DNA test to just make sure why we got this very rare disease that only, a cancer type that only Italians and Jewish people seem to be getting. So that sent us on a bit of a tailspin as to, why all the research had only been done really in those two countries.
So you wanted to have Jewish?
So, no, I only wanted to have the Jewish ancestry because Portugal, we do a lot of deals with these golden visas in Portugal. And what happened was that I had an offer that for $10,000 I could get the Portuguese passport if I could prove any kind of Jewish ancestry. So I was prepared to take the snip and whatever it needed to be, but I called my mother and she says, nope, I'm afraid not. There's nothing there. So like, damn it. So yeah.
So how many countries have you lived in?
Whoa. Well, you know what? I suppose it really depends on what do we define with living. I would say if it just means that I had to go there and I had an apartment to live there, maybe 15, 20. So there was certainly a lot of that. Also because I was a ski instructor in the winters and the club would send me to different resorts. I was a tennis instructor in the summers and these clubs would send me to other resorts again. And so that's how I suppose it all started. The fact that I was a sort of a seasonal worker and I love to travel.
Tennis instructor in the summer. Okay, perfect. So when did you switch away from this career of being ski and tennis instructor?
I think the ski instructing got me because I was being a ski instructor and I was doing like a lot of heli skiing. But one of the things that happened to me was that I was working with this guy Rico Schneller, and we were doing a lot of these races on mountain bikes, on snow scoots, on snowboards against skiers and things. And it was kind of like a like a stunt show, kind of like an early Red Bull kind of stuff. So we're sponsored by Red Bull, and we were doing a lot of these kind of crazy stunts. And through that, I got basically found by this German TV show that asked me to do all these stunts for them, for the main character. And the main character really liked me and says, "Oh, you should come and hang out." And, we film these every few months in Germany, and it's just a few weeks, and you can just work with me. So I kind of got into ski stunts, into proper being a stuntman for this show.
Okay, got it.
Until I got blown up in one of the stunts, and then I put that career to rest. So that's basically, but it did get me out of the skiing and the tennis, and I was approaching 30, and
the crisis, right? Life crisis.
No, let's not call it a crisis. A crisis was just that I got blown up and ended up in hospital. That was the crisis, really, and my family, I was happy to go on with this, but my family just said, you're getting older now, and it's time to settle down. And like I'd been doing all of these kinds of things, and they all seemed very dangerous. I'd been snowboarding in crazy places, and it was just a normal thing for me to do. And then with that explosion, I had to reevaluate.
So you have a few examples of like adventures you went on that were kind of like adrenaline.
Yeah, so I would say the first really big thing for me was that, one of the things is in those days, backpacking was a big thing, and traveling was still a lot more adventurous. And you were measured every time you would meet other backpackers. They'd all be like, "Oh, so where have you been? What's a little bit out of the ordinary?" And in the beginning, you could impress people by being in Nepal or India or South America, and people go, "Oh, that's really cool." But eventually, it was an arms race. Suddenly some guy was in Afghanistan. So you're like, "Oh shit, Afghanistan," that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And suddenly somebody was in Cambodia. And so I find myself in Cambodia in, the early 90s.
So did you do it to impress other people, or just because
I did it because of the search of adventure as well.
Yeah.
And to impress those other people. Because, it was also like the idea here was that you wanted these bigger experiences. You wanted to have something that other people couldn't get.
Was it also to like have a sense of feeling more alive, like feeling like there's something to life that actually makes you feel like more present?
I'd like to say so, because that sounds really cool. So when you write it, say yes. But you know what? I didn't even really think of it that much in those terms. I would probably say yes, that's definitely a part of it. But I would also say that you wanted to be a groundbreaker in whatever you were doing. What you didn't want to do is just repeat what other people were doing. I was keen to set a path, and so I went to Cambodia when you still had to shoot your way through the tourism areas, and it was really dangerous. And I'd go to crazy border regions. I'd cross into Pakistan, very young. I was growing beard, so there were things that you would do because it hadn't been done before, or it hadn't been done a lot. In fact, everything's been done, but it just hadn't been done so much. And in those early days of the backpacking scene, this was all seen as very cool. You'd meet the most cool people.
Yeah.
And, and that's kind of what my lifestyle was in those earlier days.
How about the fact that you were only raised by your mom? Do you think it kind of like impacted you in any way? To like maybe like have build more of this masculine side in you, like this need of being independent, of like being safe in any situation and not relying on anyone, something like that.
It's really interesting. I would probably say that my mother tried everything to beat out those instincts from me.
Yeah.
But I think like all of these things were never important to my mother. For my mother, the only thing that was important was academic success. I went to like the best schools everywhere we went. My mother was always at pains to make sure that I would go to the best schools, and she was engaged in a lifelong pursuit to get me into these things.
Yeah.
But I dare to say that crazy adventurous side actually was just something that was innately in me, because my dad was like that. And later on, when I met my dad, I realized that a lot of this stuff had come from him. And it's just something that it's this whole nature versus nurture. My mother definitely did not nurture that side of me, but the nature in it and the roots from my dad were definitely very clearly present. And people kept saying, "Oh my God, you're exactly like your father." And
so you didn't have any resentment from the fact that he left?
No, I really, it was an interesting thing because in my early 20s, I traveled, to Europe to catch up with them, and I think the initial thing was that everybody said, "Oh, he's going on this reckoning trip, and he's holding a lot of resentment," and that really wasn't the case, and he really felt that I was there for some sort of vengeance trip, and it wasn't true at all. My mother was more than able to take both those sides. And I think she did a much better job than if I had my father in my life. I think she did a much better job, and I had a kind of sort of like a stepfather figure in my life who had his life under control, and he was a very upstanding guy, and he taught me a lot of the other things, and the main male figure in my life when I was really young was my uncle, who was kind of like this.
Okay.
My idol. He was the guy that I looked up to. He was the only guy who could beat me in table tennis. I would say he was probably the most. And one of the great things about what I experienced is because I grew up without a father, I had all these very interesting men who kind of, without me ever asking, they just kind of took on these roles as mentors. And I think when I look back on it, this mentorship by people was perhaps my greatest blessing, because almost like, Gurdjieff's remarkable men, that's kind of what I collected. I collected a series and a succession of really interesting guys that I would respect and that I would listen to. And many of my decisions actually that I've made, sometimes I think, I wonder who that was. And it was my uncle's next door neighbor in Australia, this crazy guy, Steve Kulak, who was telling me all these amazing adventures. Because, when I was 25, 26, I kind of thought, okay, I'm done with travel. I'm just going to marry this amazing girl that I'm dating. I was really happy with her. And he says, you know what? This is not the best you can be. You need to get out. You need to explore the world. You can't just settle down. And
so in one hand you have this man that you look up to that tells you to keep on traveling and keep on growing and keep on tasting life in different way, and on the other side you have your mom that's like, okay, come on, let's settle down, let's chill.
My mother was definitely never one to encourage any extracurricular things. She would have been very happy to just follow that very typical path. And for her, this was the way forward. But I would meet these other guys, and I suppose because I was drawn to them, they represented something different than what I had from my mother.
When you say successful man, how do you define success? Is it
in terms of monetary success? None of those would be worth a mention. Successful only in the life that they set up for themselves.
Okay.
I think I think my uncle was very successful, but most of the stuff that I got from him was probably earlier in life, or things that were not related to his business acumen. These were things where he'd come back from his traveling days and he'd tell me these amazing stories, and that would put ideas in my head. And when I was 15, Steve would give me these amazing books like Gurdjieff or Alan Watts. In fact, there is a book there that I got from Steve, which is a first edition of Alan Watts. The most important book on Zen, I suppose. And all of these things I discovered at 15. And Steve had an incredible library of world music, and he just said, this is the Kanda Bongo Man, this is Cesaria Evora, all of these things that no one had ever heard of. And I was listening to all of this stuff. And he'd opened up his place like a library. He had thousands of books. He had all this music, and he just said, listen to this, listen to this, listen to this. And it started with the more accessible stuff, and then it got into quite, more, definitely you would say a little bit more kind of challenging material. And
so you were looking up to people that were providing you with more like insights on personal development, like culture, who had personality traits like more bold things that you wanted to integrate
Inadvertently.
Yeah.
Inadvertently, I would probably say that for me to admire somebody, it wasn't going to be an accountant who was, telling me that I should also follow in his footsteps to become an accountant.
Right.
That wouldn't have been the thing that I was after. I would bring people into my life that had something that I was fascinated by. So it's the choice of people that you follow.
Right.
And if I were to be honest, my father was also a guy like that, where every time I'd meet my dad, he would always have this massive group of admirers around him, like all these hangers on, and they would always say to me, listen, your father is like a father to all of us.
Yeah.
And I kind of always had to fight back this urge to say, oh, it's ironic that he's not a father to any of his children, all these different wives. And yet he was a guy who probably shaped a lot of lives in his own way. So, and I had no resentment at all that he hadn't been in my life, that there was none of this. It just was very interesting to find out that there were things in nature that I had in me that obviously had come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And very often, and I look at it and I go, a lot of the faults within me are the same faults that he probably had as well. And it's nice to get to know yourself that way too.
So there's another side of you that is very much in favor of female empowerment in a way.
Who said that? I never said that.
I've witnessed that you have a lot of respect for women. You want to see women empowered, independent, have their own, also carve their own paths. Right?
Only because I think they're much better at it. I think, even if I look at Angela Merkel or Jacinta Ardern, the most leaders that I admire then, again, are kind of women. They seem to be more, when they get into these positions, they seem to be a bit more rational, a bit more caring,
rational.
Yeah, absolutely. Because men have these other distractions that will actually keep them up. Now,
what's their other distraction?
Well, you know what? For most of them, I think it's there is always this politics between, or if you're in Australia, for example, all the guys in Australia just keep trying to pull each other down, you know. And what is interesting, sorry, I think what's very interesting about that is that all the great female leaders that I've had in my life were very calm, were very knowledgeable, would have much less of an ego.
Right.
Didn't spend all their time chasing young girls. I just found them much more pleasant to work with. And I would even say, I would go as far as that it all happened because, at university, I had a couple of really good male friends. But actually, all my greatest friends in life are always women.
Okay.
Even today, like all my ex-girlfriends have become, great friends. Many of my best female friends of those years are still 30 years later in my life. We had a big dinner the other day and, we'd been together for 32 years now. And I just find it easier to relate to them. I was never really a guy who went out with other guys to go drinking and stuff. Never really been a huge thing in my life. And so I think it also comes from those kinds of things that, in these terms, I find it easier to relate to women. I think it's easier to work with them in many ways. Nothing is perfect, but I would definitely say, for me, if I have the choice, generally I find it easier to work with women because you also don't have this whole competitive side. With guys, you get always a lot more of this competition, and you spend a lot of your time swinging dicks, and that doesn't really happen when you're working with women.
So it sounds like what you've witnessed for men in power is that the distraction is more like the sexual tension.
Yes. Look, I mean,
how do you explain that you, as a man, you're able to work with women and be friends with women without having this as an obstacle?
Look, I was, I suppose, lucky that I always met really nice women already. So I always had girlfriends, and I wasn't for the most part, I was very happy within the confines of having a lot of female friends. You know, and I remember some female friends, for example, when I was in Hong Kong, they would say, well, which one of these are you going to go out with? And I say, look, you know, like, I don't mind going out with somebody 5, 10 times, because Hong Kong is a small place.
Yeah.
If you decide to jump into the wrong relationship, you know, you're going to run into that person for years. So all I said was, I just like taking it easy.
Yeah.
But then I also was always, you know, I was never single for very long. You know, like I didn't have that. I mean, you and I work together. It's always professional. I can do the same thing with, you know, 100 other people. When the Me Too movement came, and, you know, I was obviously working for the Weinsteins. You know, I got about as close to that ship as you could. And, you know, there was nobody ever in my life who could point a finger and say, well, that guy, you know, he tried something on me, or he tried to kiss me or rape me or anything. No one has ever said that. And nobody could ever say anything like that. There's never been one thing about that. And again, I think it's different because I didn't necessarily get corrupted by huge power or huge money. So, you know, that always keeps you more humble. Because that, you know, the thing is with Harvey or any of these kind of guys, Harvey didn't struggle to have girls. I mean, people have this idea that he had to rape people because he couldn't get girls. Harvey would go into any club bar and he'd have 100 girls approaching him. You know, it's not because the guy couldn't get a girlfriend unless he tried to rape them.
So how do you explain?
Look, for all of the Me Too people that have been mentioned, for all of this, you know, including our mutual friends who shall go unnamed, but all of them are people who've incredibly succeeded in life. And the fact is, people throw themselves at these people anyway to take a piece of that success. You know, whether you're in the music industry, the film industry, the TV industry. You know, Bill Cosby, when he did all those, you know, when all those allegations had come through him, Bill Cosby was the biggest star in the world. He didn't need to drug people to sleep with them. He was Bill Cosby. You know, he wasn't some idiot loser who, the fact is he'd had dinner with these women, they went up to the hotel room with him, and there he would duly drug them. His thing is because he's an idiot, he's a nutter. And also, one has to say that the times are very different. You know, the rules that we all followed in 1980 are not necessarily the rules that we're all following in 2020. Society has changed a lot over those 40 years. And, you know, I think to go back that far and say, listen, what you did 40 years ago, you know, I would say that he got dealt with pretty harshly. You know, but again, the fact here is that it wasn't because he was desperate and he couldn't get girls. It was because obviously power corrupts, and these guys have a bit of a tick. You know, Harvey did not need to rape women. He had so many girls that I was interested in, wouldn't even give me a second look, would go straight to Harvey. And I'd be like, oh, come on. You know, like, you've got to be kidding me.
So do you think that changed someone's mind, or like everybody throws themselves at you and then there's this one girl that's kind of like difficult? Maybe that's...
I think what happened to him, and you know, obviously I've been seeing this firsthand quite a bit. I think what happened to him is that he would invite people to come over to the hotel or the office, which happened to be in the Mandarin Oriental, and he would invite them. They would come up, and it's not really an office, you know, it's a hotel suite where, yes, he works. And he would literally say, I have a contract right here, you know, and then he'd start getting them massaging. He'd ask them to take off their shoes, then he'd sort of massage them, then he'd come back in a bathrobe, you know, like, and he'd ask for a massage, you know, just because he's really tense. And if somebody after that kind of refused to do something, he might get very angry because maybe it was an opportunity cost that he didn't get anybody else with him to go home. You know, like, he was upset that he'd wasted that valuable time, and he could become very forceful.
So the agenda for the meeting was to sign a professional contract?
The agenda for the meeting for the girl usually is the hope of something. And all these people clearly know what that is. You see, those girls didn't go up to the room because Harvey was so beautiful. You know, he would lure them in by saying, look, you're going to read a script. You know, you have to sign an NDA before you read the script. and you'd sign it and it would have a whole bunch of stuff on, but basically said you cannot discuss anything that's going on here. And that would include all the other behavior as well.
Right.
And look, I'm not defending that person. He was clearly a person who had a lot of issues, but it didn't happen because he was desperate. And that's the idea that a lot of people get. It's more to do with power. And I think, if you ever seen, there's a comedian, Bill Burr, and Bill Burr is going, don't judge Tiger Woods. What do you don't know what it's like to putt on the 18th hole for $25 million, come off the green, and there are 200 Swedish bikini models waving their bikinis in the air. You don't get to see that. You are not prepared for it. The human mind can only take so much. And when you suddenly have all these people chasing after you, whether it's for money, for fame, ideally for both, then you're in a completely different field.
Right.
People want things from you, So is that a folding phone? Holy shit, that's pretty cool.
So what would you say that you've learned from seeing kind of the dark side of this, rich and famous world? What have you witnessed, and what is it that you would want to see change?
I would say that, I suppose I've witnessed a fair bit of it, and yes, it's a little bit dark. I would say that. Sorry, ask that again.
So, you being a witness of what's happening behind the curtains in that industry, elite type of people.
Yeah.
Right. Being in power, having all those capabilities, and kind of taking advantage of women at times, and also you being more of a protecting role as well, more of a what is it that you would want to see change in this world? What is it that you have seen, you have understood from the way humans behave, that you think is able to transition and change?
Well, let me say this first and foremost. I think the world has already changed significantly.
Right.
We are not in the same place that we were even just 10 years ago. It's things have changed significantly. I mean, I see it everywhere I go.
Yeah.
People are so much more careful. That doesn't mean these things don't go on anymore, but certainly a lot of people got very nervous. A lot of people got caught.
Yeah.
For sure, this has been a massive sea change, and there's no way that you could ever refute any of that. That is now a constant change. In a way, I think we've almost hit that spot. We've made changes, and now we're at a different level than we were. And some of it will come back a little bit, but I think we'll never go back to those times.
Right.
Every single person, policies have changed at every workplace. You have to have, I remember at university, even when I worked as a lecturer, I remember people saying to me, listen, you're not that old. One of the things that's going to happen is that you have to be extra vigilant when you're talking to a female student. And always make sure you leave the door open and the blinds up. Already I had been given this advice. And I thought, yep, this is really good advice. And look, everybody makes their own decisions to this sort of stuff. For me personally, I was lucky that I never got to a place where I even had those options. These people are very few in between. But of course, there are loads of scumbags in normal life that do these things as well.
Of course.
For these guys, it really came down to power. People look up to you.
Yeah.
I remember I brought in, all these girls to meet Jean-Claude Van Damme once. I'm just sitting there thinking, what an idiot. What an idiot. And I could see with the girls, half of them thought, what an idiot. And the other ones are just thinking, this is an opportunity. Either to sleep with somebody famous or to meet somebody famous and then say, oh look, I have a famous friend. You know, fame is a really funny thing, and you just need to look at Instagram and all of these things that are happening. So I definitely think things have changed. I definitely think that maybe because of my upbringing, I have to say that was never a world that I was lured into. I would say that I was sometimes guilty of setting up these things. Like I mean, for sure, when Harvey came to town, a friend of mine who should go unnamed, who worked as he would just say, let's call the usual suspects, and we'd round up people, and one of those incidences did happen,
but it was
in my own restaurant.
It was with their agreement that they...
Well, yes. I mean, what I said, which ended up being fantastic for me, was that I said, whatever you do, don't go home with Harvey. Whatever you do, don't go home. And one of the girls who did go home with him actually told him that. And after that, after that, I didn't really have a job anymore. But the fact that all things considered, and at the time that was a painful loss because my screenplay got killed, and there were things that I lost because of it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, with the Me Too movement, everything, I now look good because there are about 20 girls that can say, Marc very clearly told us, don't go home with Harvey. Best thing that could have happened to me. But did I go around and drive minivans and pick up girls to meet Harvey? Yes. So there was that as well. Not entirely, not guilty, but just personally, I didn't do any of that stuff. And I saw a lot of stuff. I mean, I've been witness to a lot of it, and crazy stuff that shall not be repeated, but crazy stuff where you just go, seriously, he just did that? Where people they just lose that anchor to normality. It's quite a funny thing.
So now that you are, working on different projects from real estate to community-based applications, networking applications, what is it that you want to create that hasn't been done before, or is disruptive, or is changing something, bringing something new to the world?
Well, look, I think I'm definitely being pulled. Obviously, I was very committed to the whole community building, and then we got hit by COVID, and that sort of put a little bit of a stop on things. However, I would venture to say that the commune thing is absolutely my passion, and I always loved the idea of being a global citizen. And in the last few years, this was always such a positive thing. In the 90s, when the world got opened up and the walls came down and everybody was going, you're just a global citizen now. A lot of us took on this mantle of being global citizens. And what happened to us is that, in the last 10 years or so, between Trump and, Theresa May and all these kinds of people, Theresa May saying, if you're a global citizen, you're a citizen of nowhere. Stupid comments like that bring up this nationalistic fervor. And one of the things that I always wanted to do was trying to keep everybody in this global citizenship. And so what I'm really doing here is I'm trying to take down the walls. People like myself, or say Nouriel Rubini, or these kinds of people, we travel every single week. Or sometimes 3 destinations in 1 week. And it's so amazing to have an application where you feel at home everywhere you go, where amazing people reach out to you and they go, hey, I'm in town, and you can see who's into what, and you can decide who you want to meet. Sometimes I want to meet somebody because I want to go and play tennis, or I want to go to a conference, or I'm going to go and just have a night out, or I want to go to an art event, or a dinner. All of these things are enabled through that platform. And all it really does is, it's like going to a wedding. If I go to someone's wedding, all the people are easier to speak to because you've already been vetted by these people. There's already a familiarity. You've already been vetted by the host, who basically declares with this invitation that this is a person that I trust.
Right.
And this is not a complete stranger that you're picking up at a bar. This is a person that you already have something in common with.
Right.
And that's what the app does. The app is really all about that we choose who comes in. We say, this is a really good person. If that turns out not to be the case, report that person and we'll throw them out.
And what's the criteria?
Look, the criteria, we have a pretty broad spectrum of criteria. There can be philanthropists, entrepreneurs, there can be, we have some people who are just models who travel all around the world and want to be connected. There isn't so much a guideline, it's just the ambassadors have to recommend you. If you're an ambassador and you say to me, listen, I'm vouching for this person to be of high moral character, then I go, great, you're in. I don't even have to second guess it. If I've made you an ambassador, then I will then completely trust you to make the right choice. And if you say, look, that guy, yes, that guy, super creepy, no.
A question about, this time when you were approaching 30 and
I don't even remember that.
Your mother was like, okay, time to settle down, you got your accident, make new choices in your life. Would you say that was like a tipping point for you to move to a new direction? Or is it a time when you decided like, I'm not going to listen to what people expect from me and I'm going to do whatever the hell I want?
No, I'm completely guilty of that one. I got married very shortly after. Okay. That was my first marriage. And to an amazing person. Actually, to be honest, no regrets. Was an amazing person. But I knew that there was a lot of pressure on me. And when I met this person, it was so quick. Really, within a month, we were engaged.
Okay.
And, we had this whirlwind romance across, we met in Thailand on a diving trip into Burma. We, we traveled all over Southeast Asia. Then the next time we met was in Australia. She came to Australia. And then we met in Cairo. And I ended up proposing in Jordan in the Wadi Rum desert. We almost, we're both filmmakers and we turned the whole thing into a film script, basically.
So you were a filmmaker at that time?
Yeah. So I'd been doing a lot of this kind of film, film with the stunt work, but I was really a screenwriter already. My script Boomerang was already going around the place. And so, it definitely affected me. It definitely made me think about, buying a house and settling down. And we had 2 cars. And suddenly I had this kind of thing that you looked at as a mature adult life. Suddenly you had a mortgage and credit cards that you had to pay off. And, you're doing married people things. And that was a big difference,
So you had this fuck it moment.
Well, I've had many fuck it moments, and there was definitely the moment where I said, yep, if you're gonna choose somebody, that person is an amazing person. And to be honest, I still think so now. If I go out with somebody, 9 times out of 10, they were amazing people. And I thought they were just, when you commit to somebody, you want to make sure that person is worthy of that commitment. And they have to bring a lot to the table. And, to be honest, they pretty much always did. The main reason why I would say it didn't work out a lot of the time was, either I was just too young or traveling too much. And with my kind of lifestyle, that was difficult. It wasn't always easy. And when I married my first wife, it was even more difficult because now both of us were traveling all the time to do film. And so the way we tried to square it is that she was going to continue doing film, and I took a job first as a high school teacher and then as a university lecturer. And
what were you teaching as a lecturer?
Essentially English. English was always that, even though my major was actually history and archaeology, not many people ask for those jobs.
Especially because you're all about community building, and English is the language that gets people to connect and communicate with each other wherever you are.
Yeah.
If you had life quote, life lesson, what would it be?
Oh wow. Mm, to be honest, I would say I was trying to go for something deeper, perhaps Latin, but you know,
That would work.
what?
It hasn't been done before.
It hasn't been done
No.
before. I think there is. I think really the main one is that each person is the architect of his own fortune. You know, like that. Every action that you consider always comes back to you,
Right.
and it sets a path. And then the other thing that I would say is you know, the one thing that I think is a constant in me is massive risk taking. You know, like that is, you know, I go for big shots.
Right.
And sometimes I just go, oh crap, that didn't work out. And, you know, when you take big risks, there are many of these why moments.
Yeah.
You know, I remember I've had probably 6 or 7 significant why moments. You know, why did I do this? You know, I had such a good life. You know, I had this girlfriend that I really loved, and, you know, I was very happy. And here I am in some weird Tibetan plateau in a bus, and, you know, just miserable and cold, and the bus is broken down. And, you know, there were many of these kinds of moments as to why you would do it. Or, you know, I had this amazing life in Sydney. You know, I lived in Australia's most luxurious apartment.
Yeah.
I threw all these parties.
Yeah.
I had an amazing life. And then I just decided, you know what? I'm going to go to Hong Kong and open up 2 more restaurants. And yeah, I'm just going to go and do it. You know, and that often comes back to haunt you.
Right.
And I would, you know, my university job, I had this job where I could never get fired. My family was so proud. And they're saying, oh, this is fantastic. And I just said, oh, I'm going to Hong Kong now. You know, like it's, or Japan, or I'm just gonna quit this job.
Yeah.
So often, not only would I would have to quit a job, or that job would allow me so much freedom to dictate my own rules of engagement with that job. You know, like when I went to Switzerland, I wasn't there as a heli ski instructor, but I made sure that I pitched something that was really great. And then I became the heli ski instructor. You know, that those were, I would always turn every role so that it suited me better. And if I couldn't turn the role into something that was good for me, then I would just move on. If there wasn't that creativity and that freedom, then I couldn't work there.
Right. How do you explain it? A lot of people aren't able to do this and they stay stuck in those situations.
No blame for them. It's risky.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people are going to say, you know what, I just want a comfortable life. You know, I'm happy with this, I'm happy with that. And you can take less risks. I mean, the other thing that helped me was that I was single. That I could talk myself into almost any job. You know, I would be able to walk into a bar in Hong Kong, especially in those early days. And I would walk into a bar in Hong Kong, and through friends, I would meet other people who at the end of the night would say, I love you, you have to come and work for us. And I'm going, sure, what do you do? And then suddenly I was working there. And that kept happening over and over again. And Hong Kong in those early days was this amazing place of opportunity. But the funny thing that happens is, when I then went back to Australia, I thought, well, that's just the kind of guy I am now. I just walk everywhere and people just throw jobs at me.
Yeah.
You know, amazing jobs, just here you go, here you go. And I went to Australia and that just never happened. People would say, oh, that sounds really interesting. Why don't you contact our HR department? And they would just laugh at my CV. You know, there was no... And the world is becoming, unfortunately, more like that.
Yeah.
The world is looking at these kinds of things, and they're not just going to hire you because they were impressed with you at a bar and thought that you were knowledgeable and you could do these things. But if you're an entrepreneur and you impress upon people that you are that person, then they can fund your things. So at some point, it became clear to me, I really shouldn't be working for other people. I need to be working for me and fulfilling the visions that I set myself.
So what would be your quote then? I feel like you kind of like turned your life into a movie. Like there's something there. You know what I mean? It's like...
Well, you know what? I think what I do is that every one of those significant moments, if you get those moments, I think that idea of being a film a film guy or being a screenwriter as such, I do set up a lot of moments from that kind of perspective.
Right.
Essentially you're a storyteller.
Yeah.
And because you're a storyteller, you have the ability to make certain moments perhaps a little bit more dramatic, or a flair for the theatrical, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Wait till the balloons drop.
The fact that you're also reading, literature, like Alan Watts, like kind of like power of manifestation, things like that. To touch a little bit on spirituality, do you think that you're able to manifest things in your life better, or like what's your vision of happiness? Is it to have a vision and make it come to life? What's your perspective on that?
Okay, I would say that my vision of happiness, I remember listening to this story on American Life, and it's one of these podcasts, and there was a guy, he was like this Bosnian guy, and he's now this very successful teacher at Stanford or Harvard or something like that. And but what's interesting is, in his story, he basically goes through, and what he does is, he says, when he was a young boy, he got very lucky, because even when there was this huge, when there was a huge war in Yugoslavia between, the Serbs and the Bosnians, he got incredibly lucky because, he was able to survive and go to the library, and the librarians really liked him. And so he was able to get all these books. Even though his father got killed, in the street, it was mostly positive because he and his couple of sisters were able to survive, and his mother were able to survive.
Yeah.
And then he's talking about how he was very lucky that they took him and they brought him to America, and that he was given a home and opportunities. And he felt like a bit of a cheat because he had read this amazing book in Bosnia by a Bosnian writer. And when he had to do this for an assignment, he basically copied that story, and that got him into a super good school.
Okay.
And for years, he always felt like a fraud because he had duped the whole system by cheating and writing this account. And they contacted the teacher for many years later, and they said, is that why you recommended him for the school? She's going, what story? I don't remember that story. I just remember that he was an incredibly intelligent, thoughtful, brilliant young man. That's why I recommended him to the school. I don't remember any stories that he wrote, but that's why I did it. And at the very end of the interview, his wife comes on, and his wife just says, you know what it is? He is just a very positive person. His main trait in life is that he's always been a glass half full guy. Everything that he looks at it from that point of the glass is half full.
Right.
And there are a lot of glasses half empty guys. And what your secret in life, I think, is if you just have this more positive disposition, that you just naturally look at things that way. You don't force yourself to always think, but you have this trait that you look at things in a more positive way. Even when times are a little bit dark, you still find the positivity or something positive in all of these things. And I think that is maybe the most important trait that I have. I don't know that everything I've done has always turned out amazing. Sometimes it's just been a complete disaster.
Yeah.
And usually because I trusted people. I have this thing where I really trust people.
That's true.
And sometimes, that would make me not sign papers, and then a couple of years later you kind of walk away with nothing. You're going, serious? Like, what kind of a person are you? You have done so much, you've sacrificed so much in your life, where you've gone through thick and thin, and you've done everything to be on this person's side, and that person has the gall to look you in the face and just says, oh, well, there's no contract, bad luck. And I always thought, I think that's one of those things that you have to keep a really positive attitude about. Or sign contracts.
Good lesson indeed. I have to run to a meeting, but just to sum it up, And also for the photo I can take it later. In one sentence, like what would be kind of like the essence of what you've learned in your life so far, whether that's when it comes to, you know, the relationship between men and women, or like, you know, like taking risks and going after your dreams no matter what, whether it's about, you know, the outlook on life, being positive despite things that go wrong. What's kind of like the main thing that like gets you going, that you always stand for?
Mm-hmm. And I need to do it now, or send
You
it to
can
you?
think about it.
Yeah, let me think about it.
Okay.
If this is going to be the one sentence, I should make it something, you know, a little bit more
The
interesting.
one in Latin maybe.
Oh, you know, I don't know if the Latin thing necessarily